The world isn't flat, but it isn't round either. I learned the hard way. 10 years ago, I pulled my wife's scorched, lifeless body out of a Florida swimming pool. We had only been married for 3 days. You read that right. 3 days. I wish the story didn't start there, but it does. Avery Jones was my soulmate. She was funny, spunky, and cute as hell. I was so deeply, ridiculously in love with her, and for good reason. She was way out of my league, but somehow she liked me enough to marry me. After 6 months of dating and another 6 months of engagement, we got married in a humble chapel in the Wasatch Mountains just outside of Salt Lake City. The next day, we flew out for a 10-day honeymoon at a beachfront resort in Fort Lauderdale, a wedding gift from my parents. On our second day there, while laying out on the beach, gnarly clouds blew in, accompanied by the heaviest rain I had ever seen. We laughed at our luck, packed up quickly, and ran with the rest of the beach and pool goers towards the hotel. "Come this way," Avery said, pulling me down a narrow stone path through the landscape to a secluded cave installation under a bridge. Laughing hysterically with the help of our rain-diluted piña colada, we shed our dripping wet clothes and towels and sat down on the pool chairs in the cave. "You know we could swim right here," Avery said, pointing to the portion of the pool covered by the faux rock. I pretended to think it was a bad idea, then tackled her into the water. We splashed and wrestled around for a few minutes by ourselves, the heavy rain clapping outside the cave. After a few minutes, I hopped out and grabbed a couple dry towels from a nearby chair. I kicked my feet up and sat back, sipping my drink. Avery began an interpretive, synchronized swimming routine in her bright blue bikini. She whipped her auburn hair back and forth and swung her hands above her head with effortless grace. Even though she was joking, I was mesmerized. She was mine. I was hers. It was surreal, but then I got a feeling, a horrible feeling, one that said disaster was imminent. I didn't say anything to Avery, though, since I prided myself on being rigidly pragmatic, giving credence to feelings. Only our third day of marriage seemed like a bad idea. Whether it was a premonition or not, lightning struck the pool with a deafening crack. A deadly shockwave surged through the pool, killing Avery instantly and shooting me back against the rock wall. Once my hearing and sight returned, I saw Avery floating face down in the pool, 20 feet away from the cave. I yelled for help and jumped in. Hotel staff ran over and together we got her out of the pool. Medical staff arrived shortly thereafter, and then an ambulance. She was pronounced dead on sight. The next day we flew home, one of us seated in coach, the other in a body bag stashed below deck. I fell into a funk after the funeral and never recovered. I was convinced Avery was my soulmate, so when she died, the world fell out of working order. Nothing made sense anymore. I never dated again or had any interest in women, or people for that matter. I took a job in Texas, bought a townhome, and quickly got into a routine. I talked to my parents occasionally, but only returned home maybe 3 times over the last 10 years. Not a day goes by that I don't think about her. Hell, not even an hour. As our 10th anniversary approached, the data analytics firm I worked for was bought by another company, and I was let go. Though I was initially pissed, my tune shifted once the generous severance check came in the mail. The night the check came, I drank a lot and stumbled through Avery and my wedding album. Sometime around 1 a.m, I made a decision. I decided that a decade of mourning was long enough. I decided that the next 10 years of my life weren't going to be steeped in self-pity. I would make something of myself. I'd read books again, I'd make videos again, I'd make friends, I'd pick up the guitar. The next night, with a drink in hand and money in the bank, I sat down at my desk and developed a plan with a vague goal of getting out of the country for a little bit. Somewhere around 2 a.m, I fell into the rabbit hole called the flat earth theory. I spent the next 3 hours reading and watching YouTube videos. For some reason, it all got funnier and funnier as the night went on. I didn't accomplish much that night, but by the next night I had a solid plan. Over the next couple months, I sold my townhome, bought a camera, and booked an around-the-world trip in 5 flights. My objective was to document my travels and prove, once and for all, that the world was round. For the 3 weeks before my trip began, I moved back to Salt Lake City with my parents, who were surprisingly supportive of the endeavor. In my first video, I explained the rules. I would travel east until I made it back home. I would have a compass on me at all times. I would be awake and alert at all times of travel. Anyone who was staunch in their belief that the world is flat would likely think I'm faking the whole thing. But that wasn't really the point of the trip. I was trying to become a new man, remember? The day before I left, I was feeling nervous and oddly existential, more so than normal. This was big. Traveling around the world by myself. I never dreamed I could have done something like this, especially since Avery died. Part of me was proud of myself. The other part of me was questioning what the hell I was doing. Whatever it was, I decided to leave something behind to commemorate my existence. I stayed up late, scrolling through thousands of pictures, and ultimately choosing 4 for print. Avery and me on our wedding day, my cousin and me on skateboards, my parents and me last Christmas, and a horribly awkward picture of me standing by myself outside my Texas townhome. I rolled the pictures up tight, stuffed them in a dry Guinness bottle, then took the bottle and a shovel up the mountain behind my parents' house. About a 1/4 mile up the hill, I found a nice clearing amongst the scrub oak and dug a hole 2 feet deep. With my headlamp, I could see Avery's eyes peering at me through the thick brown bottle. I cried for a good 5 minutes, then tossed it into the hole. I covered it the best I could and returned home to get a couple hours of shut-eye before flying out. My dad drove me to the airport the next morning. I flew from Salt Lake to New York, New York to Amsterdam, Amsterdam to Shanghai, Shanghai to Los Angeles, then Los Angeles to Salt Lake. I'm intentionally not getting into too much detail about the trip itself, because that's not really the point of me writing this. Okay, I'll indulge a little bit. How long did the trip take? A little over a month. I spent about a week in each place and 3 days in LA. Did I have fun? Hell yes. I had the time of my life. I realized that being away from the drudgery of my routine allowed some of my old self to re-emerge, my pre-lightning strike days. I made friends, I was funny, I was charming. It was a little weird, honestly. Was it good for me? Other than what I'm about to tell you, yes, it was fantastic. I truly feel like a changed man. Did I gain a following? I actually did. I mean, I didn't go viral or anything, but as of this writing, I have about 50,000 subscribers. Most think the flat earth theory is BS, but some are believers. I don't know if any of them will ever read this. How do you feel about that lame time capsule now? I know you probably didn't have this question specifically, but this is important to me. The longer the trip went on, the more embarrassed I felt about the time capsule I left in the ground behind my parents' house. The life I conveyed in that bottle was tinged with regret, loss, sorrow. Particularly my apathetic face standing in front of my stupid townhome or with my parents on Christmas. I decided on my trip that I wouldn't replace any of the pictures in the time capsule, but I would add some, change the ending of my story, if you will. Okay, enough of that. So, is the world round? That's where things get complicated. I successfully stayed awake during all hours of travel, which was very difficult, especially that Amsterdam to Shanghai leg. Good God. But I can confidently say that I traveled east the whole time and successfully made it back to Salt Lake, which would rule out the whole flat earth thing. But I can't confidently say the earth is round either. Here's what happened. When I got home, both the front, back and side doors were locked. I tried the garage keypad, but it didn't work. When I texted my mom, it failed to go through. Then I tried my dad. Same thing. I brushed it off, telling myself that a month is a long time. My parents could have switched cell carriers and could have changed the garage code. With no way into the house and nothing to do, I decided to make the planned modifications to my time capsule right then, even though it was dark out. I trekked up the mountain with a shovel from the back porch and found the spot 20 minutes later. I dug cautiously and successfully extracted the bottle. I saw Avery's eyes again peering at me through the brown bottle, this time a little foggy from sitting underground for a month. As I pulled the rolled-up pictures out, I decided that merely adding new pictures wasn't going to solve my problems. I needed a ritual, a way to symbolize my rebirth. I thought about ripping up the old pictures or burning them. I thought about collecting everything I still owned of Avery's and throwing it into a bonfire. Perhaps I wouldn't be able to move on until I could erase Avery, the personification of my old deceased self, from my life. Like I said before, I was a new man. Then I saw something at my feet. With the flashlight on my phone, I saw that I had dropped one of the old photos. It was the picture of me and my parents at dinner last Christmas at the Grand America Hotel. Only in this picture there was a fourth person, a beautiful woman about my age with fair skin and long auburn hair. It was Avery. I was confused at first. Perhaps I had put a different picture in the bottle than I had thought. God knows Avery and I had gone to plenty of dinners with my parents when she was alive. But I wouldn't have done that. I already had a picture of Avery and me on our wedding day. That was enough. I remember distinctly thinking one picture of Avery was enough. Then I looked closer at myself in that picture. It was definitely from last Christmas. It was 33-year-old me, not 23-year-old me. I had a beard last Christmas, a feat I could not have managed when I was 23. Since I printed the pictures only a month before, I pulled up the original on my phone with numb, shaky fingers and held them side by side. It was the same picture. I had before me two distinct realities, one in which Avery was alive and one in which Avery was dead. Everything else was the same. How the hell is this possible, I thought. The picture of our wedding day was the same. So was the picture of my cousin and me skateboarding. The picture of me standing in front of my Texas townhome was different, though. Instead of a townhome, it was a small red house, apparently still in Texas. And of course, Avery was standing next to me wearing a green plaid button-up shirt. Avery would have pursued her degree in nursing had she lived, I'm sure. The dual income would have allowed us to buy a house instead of a townhome, I figured. But still, what the fuck is happening? My knees grew weak and I sat down, looking back and forth between the two pictures with Avery now in them. She truly was stunning, more beautiful than I remembered. I stumbled into a new reality. I don't know how or when, but here I am, in a world where Avery lives. I'm sure that isn't the only difference, but it's the only one I'm aware of as of this writing. If I truly am in a new reality, what happened to the old one? Am I missing? Did I get duplicated? Did that old reality disappear? I laid on my back in the crunchy snow and closed my eyes. Where do I go from here? A pair of headlights flashed through the aspen trees, and I sat up abruptly. A car was pulling up the driveway. I shuffled my way down the snowy banks close to the house. I remained perched there for about 5 minutes before the kitchen lights clicked on, and I saw 4 people emerge. 2 of them were my parents, looking the exact same as they did in the other reality. Then in walked Avery. Then, in a moment even more unsettling than seeing Avery alive, I saw myself enter the room. My heart was pounding. Other me was wearing the same outfit I'm wearing today, even sporting the same scruff. The only difference was the little bit of grey hair above his ears. I slid further down the hill to get a closer look. For a moment, a long moment, I forgot about my replica and watched Avery. She was gorgeous in person, more gorgeous than in pictures. She had always been that way. This is what my life would look like if I hadn't been such a coward, I thought, feeling a tear trickle down my cheek. The four of them talked and laughed excitedly, eventually shedding their coats and moving to the front living room. I climbed down the rock wall and ran around to the front of the house, hiding behind a group of pine trees near the front stairs. My dad left for a couple minutes and returned with a bottle of wine and 4 glasses. I fell deeper into a daze watching them, mostly Avery. They had a great time chatting for at least a couple hours, while I sat like a fool between the pines, my toes and hands freezing. She was so effortlessly charismatic, so charming. The way she talked with her eyes, the way her teeth flashed when she smiled, the way she leaned in when she was engaged. Everything about her was perfect. What I wouldn't do to steal this man's reality. I watched other me and Avery say their goodbyes and exit through the kitchen. Their car doors slammed shut, and I realized that I was going to lose them. In my reality, I was living at home while I did my around-the-world trip. Where would I have lived if I was still married to Avery? We had always talked about returning to the Salt Lake area eventually. Maybe they did it. As they rolled down the driveway in their 2019 Honda Accord, I ran to the side of the house and found an old bike from my childhood rusted against the wall. Both tires were flat and the front brakes didn't work, but since my parents lived way up in the mountains, wherever other me and Avery were going was downhill. Even though I went as fast as I could, they were long gone. Obviously. My 25-year-old junkyard bike didn't stand a chance. But I kept going, rolling past the church, the junior high, then through the Oak Hills neighborhood, all the while racking my brain. If Avery and I were still married, where would we have lived? It wasn't a fair question to ask myself. After all, we had known each other for a little over a year, and had only been married 3 days when she died. In this other reality, other me and Avery had been married 10 years. That's a lot of time to know someone. People change, opinions change, circumstances change. I can't read other me's mind, so all I could do was hope for a miracle. As I was about to turn the corner onto Orchard Drive, I saw a pair of taillights in a driveway off a side street. Fair Oaks Drive. Of course, I thought. Avery and I talked about renovating an old home on Fair Oaks one day. But man, that was one conversation when we were engaged. Impressive that they pulled it off. My vision was blurry from biking almost a mile downhill in freezing temperature. But as I got closer to the house, I recognized the car to be theirs. I snuck around the back of the house where I had a view of the living room and kitchen. I smiled looking at the renovated, well, mostly renovated, home. Pictures of Avery and other me lined the walls. There was even an old stand-up piano in the corner. Just like the one Avery had always talked about, I found a little slice of heaven. This is everything my life would have been had I acted on that inner voice to pull Avery out of the water 10 years ago. Instead, I'm a depressed bum living with my parents. They made their way into the kitchen and took off their coats. Other me started on the dishes and Avery sat on the couch, eyes glued to her phone. I figured they were exhausted. It was midnight after all. After a minute, Avery stood up and walked down the hall. I ran to the other side of the house to try and get a view of her, but as I turned the corner, an outdoor security light came on, and I ducked down in some bushes. Other me put the dishes down and walked to the back window to inspect. Then I heard a crash from inside, where Avery was. Other me jerked around, then stopped in his tracks. Go help her, I thought. You cowardly bastard. I returned to my original post in time to see Avery stomping down the hallway and into the kitchen. She was red-hot furious. She walked right up to Other Me with a piece of paper in her hand. I couldn't hear exactly what she said, but she screamed something and threw the paper at his face. Other Me put his hands up as a weak defense. What did you do to Avery this time? As Other Me tried to explain away whatever was on that paper, Avery grew more furious. She paced to the kitchen and barked something else, then picked up a glass Other Me had been in the middle of washing and threw it across the room, shattering on impact. Who the hell is this woman? Other Me continued to speak calmly in defense, but there was no slowing Avery down. She grabbed a picture off the wall and threw it hard on the ground, the wooden frame crunching. Other Me backed away slowly, moving to the other side of the kitchen island. Then Avery pounced. She ran at him with unrestrained vengeance and shoved him hard against the kitchen cabinets. He held his hands out again, pleading for her to calm down. She grabbed a plate from the sink and swung it at him, but he moved out of the way and it shattered violently against the cabinets behind him. This only made her madder. She shoved him again, then clawed at his face. Other Me got tangled in his feet and stumbled against the fridge. She slapped him hard against the side of the head and he yelped in disbelief. Again, he begged for her to stop, but she didn't. She hit him 3 more times in the face while he slumped to the ground. After the third hit, one of his eyes was already swollen shut and blood was streaming down his face. Avery walked to the other side of the kitchen island, and I breathed an audible sigh of relief. Avery, the girl of my dreams. The girl that made all my friends jealous. The girl I had on a pedestal for the last decade. A monster. I know that we tend to forget people's negative attributes after they've passed, but there was not a violent bone in Avery's body when I knew her. Not even an aggressive one. She was sweet, kind, loving. Not like this. Not at all. What happened to her? As I watched the other bruised and bloodied version of myself weep on the kitchen floor, my world crumbled. All this time I had hated myself for not listening to that voice, for not pulling her out of the pool and saving her life. If only I had done that, we could have gone on to create a beautiful life together. Finish school, build careers, buy a house, get a dog. We'd do it laughing and playing the whole time like 2 kids in love. I'd be complete forever. But with that one lapse in judgment, Avery died along with the entire vision for my perfect future. But no, that's not how life would have been. This has how life would have been, with me crying on the kitchen floor, with blood running down my face and shattered dishes all around me. Is it possible that my reality, the one I came from, was the better life? There was another crash and a scream from the bedroom. Avery round 2. She stomped back into the kitchen and Other Me stumbled to his feet. Again, he tried to calmly plead, but again she wasn't having it. She yelled at him for another minute, then threw a coffee mug at him, shattering against his shoulder. He backed away from her, moving to the back door close to where I was hiding. I ducked down further. The door burst open and Other Me went sprawling past me, tripping and falling into the snow. Avery stopped in the doorway and scoffed. You think you're better off without me, don't you? That's what all this is about, she said. Avery, please. Think about what you're doing. Look what you've done to me just now. We cannot keep living like this. I cannot keep living like this. I've put up with it for far too long, Other Me said, and stood up. Avery began sobbing quietly, her arms folded tight. Other Me took a step toward her. Don't get any closer to that thing, I thought. You're right. You're so right, Avery said, tears running down her cheeks. God, I'm so horrible to you. You don't deserve this. You deserve someone better. far better. Someone who will love you no matter what. No matter. Other me stayed composed while she cried. "Will you ever forgive me?" she said. There was a minute of silence. I tried to steady my breathing despite feeling like I was going to explode. Other me swallowed hard and widened his stance. "No. Avery, this is it. I'm doing this. It doesn't mean we're over, it just means I need some time." "Away." He turned his back to her and walked to the front of the house where the car was parked. Avery huffed and slammed the back door, returning to the kitchen. I peered my head up and saw her going to the knives next to the stove. I thought about intervening but didn't know how. She carried a knife to the front door. I ran around the side of the house, past the security light to the front. Other me had just turned on the car and was starting to back out of the driveway when Avery appeared with the knife. "Stop!" she screamed at him, trying to block his path. Other me continued backing out, his eyes growing wide when he saw the massive knife in her hand. "Stop this fucking car right now!" she screamed and tried stabbing one of his tires, but its rotation kicked the knife of her hand. She quickly picked it up off the driveway. He pulled into the street and sped away, leaving Avery standing in the driveway in her pajama shorts, with a giant knife dangling by her side. When the headlights were gone, she dropped the knife and began crying again. My first instinct was to comfort her, an instinct that I quickly overruled. I only watched her in pure bewilderment. Never should have left fucking Texas. After a few minutes, she returned inside, and I could hear her cleaning up the mess. That's when something dawned on me. I made a time capsule because I was about to do something big, something life-changing. For me, I was about to embark on an around-the-world trip. But why would other me make a time capsule? Was he also planning something big? Before I could follow that train any further, I realized that the paper that set Avery off a few minutes before was now sitting in the middle of the driveway. I stood up carefully, making sure I was out of sight, and grabbed it. With my phone as a flashlight, I read the paper. SLC to JFK, 12:28. JFK to AMs, 1:4. To PVG, 1:12. PVG to LAX, 1:19. LAX to SLC, 1:23. I let the crumpled paper fall to the ground. He was planning the same trip I just came from, which meant he was going to experience what I just experienced. Probably. If he makes it around the world and returns to Salt Lake, he would be stepping into a new reality. If anyone deserves a new reality, it's that guy, so I didn't try to stop him. Lightning struck a tree nearby, knocking me to the ground and killing the power to the rest of Fair Oaks. It began to rain. I walked to Orchard Drive and followed it to Dee's, the only 24-hour diner on this side of town. I'm writing this on a borrowed laptop in a booth that Avery and I had occupied many times when we were younger. I don't know what happened to the reality I came from, if I'm now missing or dead or what. I don't know what will happen to other me if and when he makes his trip around the world. I don't know if there are other me's planning around the world trips too, thereby disrupting who knows how many more realities. How many other realities are there? Infinite. Frankly, I don't even know what will happen to this post once I publish it. I assume it will be trapped in this reality forever, but who knows how this works? Just a few hours earlier, I smugly thought I'd figured out the answer to the embarrassingly juvenile question, the world round. My cab just got here, so this is the end of the line for me. There are plenty of unanswered questions here, questions I hope I'll eventually find answers to. All I know now is that I don't like the reality I came from, and I don't like the reality I'm in now, so there's only one way to go. See you in New York. I discovered my medical records. My family has been lying to me. Hello everyone, my name is Unnerving. I've recently discovered a horrific truth about myself that has kept me confined to my bedroom for the last week. A truth that changed the trajectory of my life and irreversibly altered my brain. And to think it was just so accidental. Just one small incident, and I was forced to face the brunt of reality. For years I went about my life as though nothing was wrong. I didn't feel any different than anyone else. I didn't see myself as anything more than just another teenager, managing his way through the murky waters of high school. I did struggle finding friends, though. That was a big weakness of mine. I'd greet people offhandedly in the hallways, and they'd greet me back, often through cold stares, but I could never manage finding a group that I really fit into. What helped me tremendously during those lonely times was my vibrant home life. I could not have asked for better parents. My mother worked as an accountant, and my father had invested a ton into Apple before it really became the corporate giant that it is today. Mum worked from home for the most part, and Dad had retired the minute he made his first 10 million. My mother didn't work because she had to. She liked to work. She liked knowing that she served a purpose other than being my dad's trophy wife. She hated being referred to as that. A trophy wife, she'd say. Such an outdated term. She never let her disdain show, however. She'd simply smile wider, flashing her beautifully white teeth, before laughing and thanking the person for the compliment, her fist balled tightly at her side. And, before you even think it, yes, my father loved my mother. They were soulmates. She was the woman who had his heart, and he had hers. Though our house was bigger, the love remained the same. Writing this now, it feels like my brain is just covering for me. I know what I know, and I just can't force myself to believe what I know isn't real. My parents were very attentive. Not helicopter parents, but caring parents. They were there for me when I needed them most. I can't tell you how many times I'd come home from a long day at school only to find my dad in the kitchen, whipping up some homemade supper, while my mum lay curled up on the couch, knitting the same scarf as always as she waited for me to tell her about my day. Dad brought the food, and Mum brought the comfort, and together we'd sit for hours while I rambled on about what was bothering me. Together we'd dissect the problem, find the solution, and by the end I'd feel brand new. So much stress for such a young boy, Mum would sigh. You need to learn to relax, sweetie, Dad would agree, his favourite phrase being, all things pass, Donovan, which he'd announce like a mantra before picking a movie for us to watch, while Mum made hot tea for each of us. Mum's tea always made me feel better, no matter how hard a day I had been having. Made with love and a special secret ingredient that only your dad knows about, she'd slyly announce with a wink to my father, who'd flash her a smile from his spot on the sofa. As high school came to an end, and it was time to choose a real career path, I had no other job in mind other than firefighting. I loved the idea of doing work that mattered, helping people when they were in dire need. Little did I know this decision would become the one that unraveled my mind piece by piece. You see, there are a few things you need to join the force, one of them being your medical records. Simple enough, right? My parents disagreed. They more than disagreed, they discouraged me from even wanting to join. From the moment they found out that joining meant sharing my medical records, they were completely against my plan. I found that comfort came less and less these days. Mum stopped knitting. Dad stopped cooking. We hardly spent any time together at all. One thing that never changed, however, as though a small gesture of hope, was that my mother continued to make my tea. She'd either hand it to me rudely, or I'd awake to find it sitting on my nightstand. Other than that, though, it felt like my parents were slowly turning their backs on me. It's not like I wouldn't ask them to support me. I'd pretty much beg them for assurance and help with my mental state, It was as though they ignored me every single time. "You're grown now, Donovan. You can figure this out yourself. Your father and I want no part in it," my mum would taunt, coldly. We argued a lot more than we'd ever done before. It really tore me apart to feel such intense coldness coming from someone who was as warm as my mother. Dad was no different. He just seemed to stop caring, as if my decision to join the fire department was a betrayal of him. "We have more money than you could count in a lifetime, son. Why? Why do you want to do something as grueling as firefighting? I could make a call and have you in Harvard like that," he pressed, punctuating his last word with a snap of his fingers. "It's work that matters, Dad. I want to help people. I want to be good." I don't know why you and Mum don't understand that. He looked at me like I had just slapped him in the face before marching upstairs without another word. As days dragged on, what had started as small gestures of disapproval soon turned into snarls of malice and disgust. After weeks of insults and cruelties hurled at me by both my mum and Dad, everything culminated in one event where my dad led me to the garage. Locking the door behind him, he got into his Mercedes and started the engine. He revved the car 4 or 5 times, and soon the garage became filled with carbon monoxide gas. The entire time while I pounded on the window, begging him to stop, he just sat there, stone-faced, before cracking his window and teasing, as calm as could be. "Call the fire department. See if they'll come save you." He then rolled the window back up and revved the engine a few more times. I could feel my vision beginning to swim, and I was on the verge of passing out when the garage door flung open, and Mum pulled me into the house. She left me lying on the floor as she fanned me with some of her accountant papers while I struggled to recover. Once my vision had gone back to normal and I could actually breathe again, Mum leaned in close and whispered, "Now, did the fire department save you, or did your mother?" And as quickly as she appeared, she disappeared back upstairs to her office. Dad followed swiftly behind her, stepping over me like I was trash before trotting up the stairs without so much as glancing at me. This was the moment I made my decision to leave home. I didn't care how happy we once were. Happiness seemed foreign now. Safety seemed foreign now. I was going to get into the department whether they liked it or not, and I was going to be gone before they even got the chance to realize it. I stood to my feet and dusted myself off, mentally preparing to go upstairs to pack my things. I'd live out of my car if I had to. As I climbed the stairs at the top, I was greeted by my mother and father. They looked down on me, wordlessly, disappointingly, before shaking their heads and returning to their bedroom in unison. Whatever. I packed a week's worth of clothes, enough to get away for a while and clear my head before coming back for the rest. As I walked out my front door, I glanced over my shoulder for one last look at the house before I completely separated it from my heart. Dad looked at me. He had a mixture of sadness, regret, and sorrow on his face as he said his goodbyes. "Be seeing you, son," was all he could manage. That's all I got from the man I once looked up to, the man who had just attempted to murder me in the garage. And so I left. I left for the very last time. Well, for the last time in which I'd felt whole, at least. The drive to the medical center was an extremely emotional one. It was as if I could hear my parents' voices. Their "I love yous," Mum's words of reassurance, and Dad's mantra. They all floated around in my head and caused my eyes to fill with tears. By the time I'd reached the medical center, I was a blubbering mess and had to clean myself up in the parking lot before going inside. I provided the front desk lady with my social security number, and I waited for her to return with my records. I took some comfort in knowing that I was one step closer to my dream, despite how my parents felt. But the collapse of my family weighed heavily on my chest. With a stoic expression, the lady returned and slid the papers to me along with my social security card. As I sat in my car reading through the paperwork, I could feel the breath in my lungs evaporate while my heart seemed to stop beating. I rushed home, tears staining my cheeks, and my mind racing at 1,000,000 miles a minute. I swung the front door open and screamed for my parents in a broken voice, but the house remained quiet. I raced upstairs, praying to God that they would be in their bedroom, but what I found instead was an empty room, void of any furniture, not even a bed. In the living room, I found my mum's scarf, still sitting in her place on the sofa, still unfinished. In the kitchen, right by the tea kettle, was what made me fall to my knees and wail in sheer agony. My parents weren't here. They'd never been here. I had been experiencing an excruciating slip, and this little orange bottle of haloperidol proved it. My parents are dead. They died tragically when I was 17, and I had to listen to their screams of pain as they were roasted alive in a house fire at a party they were attending. My dad's retirement party, which had been thrown at a friend's house. I had been waiting outside after my mum assured me that they'd be leaving here in a few minutes. Before the fire broke out, trapping all 20 of the guests inside. I wanted to help. I wanted to free them from the inferno, but I was too weak. I couldn't even get near the flames. Remorse, dread, and the terrifying realization that I had been living a lie all hit me at once like a freight train from hell. And that's why I'm here, locked away in this bedroom. I can't cope with leaving right now, but I think I'm getting better. I truly believe that I'll be on the rise eventually, but for now I just want to lie here, alone. As I said, it's been about a week of nothing but darkness and moping for me. However, as I'm writing this, I believe that I smell that sweet aroma of my mother's tea, freshly brewing in my kitchen, and I think I'm gonna go see if she'll pour me a glass. I left blood in a cave that isn't on any map. I'm typing this with my left thumb because my other hand is wrapped so thick it looks like a winter mitten. If you've ever crawled into a cave you shouldn't have, you already know the first lie you tell yourself is that you're doing it safely. We weren't. We were just careful enough to feel responsible. Helmets, 2 headlamps each. Mine was a black diamond spot that still had the price sticker on the battery door because I'm lazy. Each of us had a tiny backup light in a pocket, a cheap rope, and a first aid kit the size of a paperback that made us feel grown up. It was my idea. That part matters. We heard about the cave the usual way. Somebody's cousin knew somebody who used to go in there all the time. The location was given to us like a dare, not like directions. A pull-off with no sign, a thin trail that looked like deer made it, and then a hole in limestone you could miss if you weren't looking for it. No gate, no posted signs, nothing that said keep out. We told ourselves that meant it was fine. We parked in a gravel patch that had room for maybe 2 cars, the kind of place where the weeds are taller than your bumper, and there's always a crushed soda can and a beer bottle in the brush. No trailhead map, no register box, just trees and quiet. We did the thing where you stand at the entrance and kill your lights for a minute so your eyes stop fighting the dark. That's when we heard it. Breathing, not a drip, not water moving, not a bat flutter. It sounded like someone breathing through their nose, slow and calm, like they were asleep just inside the rock. My friend clicked his light on and swept the entrance. The beam caught wet stone and pale dust and nothing else. Air moving, he whispered. like the cave cared. I nodded because I wanted it to be air. We turned our lights off again and listened. The breathing stopped. That should have been enough. Instead, I laughed, the dumb kind of laugh you do when you're trying to make your body unclench, and I said, "Okay." Weird. Let's go. The cave swallowed light in a way that didn't feel normal. It wasn't just dark. It felt absorbent, like your beam hit the walls and didn't bounce back the way it should. The entrance narrowed fast. We ducked, then crouched, then moved in that half-walk, half-squat that makes your thighs burn. The floor shifted from gritty rock to mud that grabbed your boots and made little sucking sounds every time you lifted your feet. After a while, the air stopped smelling like outside. No leaves, no cold breeze, no anything. Just stone and damp. We dropped through a squeeze into a wider chamber and stood up like we'd earned it. It was big enough to stand in comfortably, with a dark passage on the far side that looked like a throat. That's where the smell hit us. Not cave smell. Not damp mineral. This was sweet and sour at the same time, like old meat left in a freezer after the power goes out. It stuck to the back of my tongue. It made me swallow, even though swallowing didn't help. My friend covered his nose with his sleeve. "I don't like that." I didn't answer right away, because I was listening. Every cave has a rhythm. Drips. Distant water. Little ticks. A low, constant background that keeps you from noticing how quiet it really is. This chamber had none of that. Then, from somewhere in that far passage, we heard a soft scrape. Not loud, not sudden, just the sound of something being pulled across rock. I snapped my light toward the passage. The beam shook because my hand was already starting to tremble. Nothing. Just stone. The scrape happened again. Closer this time. Low to the ground. My friend took a step back and his boots skidded in the mud. "Turn around." We had a rule. If either of us says turn around, we turn around. No arguing. No ego. I broke the rule by taking one stupid step toward the far passage, like getting closer would turn fear into curiosity. The scrape stopped. Silence pressed in. Then came a small wet click, like a tongue against teeth, like someone trying to imitate a sound they'd heard a human make. My friend didn't whisper this time. "We're leaving." We turned. The squeeze we'd come through looked different from this side. That happens underground. Your brain files the shape away wrong, then hands it back to you like a bad memory. My friend went first because he's smaller. I followed, flattening myself into the gap, helmet scraping stone, breath loud in my own ears, my headlamp beam jittering across rock inches from my face. We were halfway through when something touched my ankle. Not a brush, not a bump, a grip, cold, dry, pressure like fingers, but too long, too many points of contact. I kicked hard. My boot hit something that felt like knotted cord stretched over bone. The grip tightened. I yelled my friend's name, and the sound ricocheted off the cave walls until it turned into pure panic noise. My friend's boots scuffed faster ahead of me. "Go!" he shouted. "Go, go!" The thing on my leg yanked. I slid backward an inch. In a squeeze that tight, an inch is a mile. I twisted and kicked again. The grip slid higher, past my boot, against my calf, and I felt a sharp sting, then warmth. It was cutting me, not with a blade, with something rough and hard, dragging across skin. One of my hands came free. I reached back blindly, grabbing at whatever had me. My fingers hit hair, thin hair wet with cave moisture, stuck to something that felt like skin stretched too tight. I jerked my hand away and it came back with a few pale strands stuck to my glove. Panic hit like a switch flipping. I surged forward with everything I had, helmet banging rock hard enough to spark my vision. Shoulders scraping, hips catching, ribs grinding against stone. The grip slipped, caught, then tore away. When I burst out of the squeeze, I slammed onto my hands and knees in the mud and sucked air like it was my first breath. My friend grabbed the strap of my pack and yanked me upright. "Don't look," he said. I looked anyway. My headlamp beam swung back to the squeeze. At first, nothing. Then something pressed into the gap from inside, not coming out, just pushing forward like it was testing the space. Pale, not white, more like the color of old fat. The surface looked wet, but didn't drip. A mouth, too wide, packed with small teeth, not predator teeth. More like someone crammed too many human teeth into one place. No eyes that I could see. Just smooth skin catching the edge of my light. It made that wet click again, and breathed in through something that might have been a nose. The same breathing we'd heard at the entrance. My friend yanked me away so hard my neck snapped back. We ran. My leg throbbed, and every step sent a bright pulse up my calf. Warm wetness soaked my sock. Behind us the scrape followed, sometimes close, sometimes far, never gone. We hit another low squeeze and dropped to our bellies. The scrape behind us changed. Faster, a shuffle, like it had decided. Something hit the back of my boot, then my injured calf. The texture came through my pants, hard ridges under thin skin. It didn't feel like muscle. It felt like something that shouldn't bend, bending anyway. I kicked back on instinct, and my heel landed against something that felt like a jaw. It clamped, not a deep bite, a hold, teeth pressing through fabric into skin, enough to flash my vision white. I screamed. Ugly, honest noise. My friend reached back, grabbed my wrist and pulled like he was trying to rip me out of the cave by force. Stone scraped my ribs. My helmet snagged. My bad leg flared and I tasted metal in my mouth. Then my boot tore free with a wet rip, and I slid forward, dragging my leg through the narrow space while something behind me clicked and scraped at rock like it was frustrated. We burst out into a sloping tunnel that led toward the entrance chamber. Fresher air hit my face in faint cold waves, the best thing I've ever felt. We didn't stop until we hit the first chamber, the one with old graffiti and muddy footprints from other people who'd turned around where we didn't. The grey smear of daylight was visible ahead. For 1 second I thought it was over. Then the breathing started again, louder now, and it had something extra in it. A faint tremor, like excitement. My friend kept a hand on my pack and pushed me forward. We hit the mouth of the cave and spilled into the trees and the normal world. I fell onto leaves and dirt and lay there gulping air that suddenly felt too thin. My friend stood a few feet away, staring at the entrance like he expected it to follow us. I stared too. The darkness inside didn't move, but right at the edge where stone met daylight, something shifted, just enough for us to know it was there. A pale curve, the suggestion of a head leaning forward, testing light, and then from just inside the mouth, it made a sound that was almost a word. My friend's voice, but flattened and wrong, like someone wearing it. Leaving. My friend grabbed my arm and hauled me up. We half walked, half staggered back to the car. I don't remember the trees. I remember the way my own breathing sounded too loud. At the gravel pull-off, my friend sat me on the bumper and peeled my pant leg up. 3 long cuts ran down my calf where it had grabbed me first, like I'd been raked by rough stone. Below that, a crescent of shallow punctures where it had clamped. Too many. Too evenly spaced. Not like any animal bite I've seen. He poured water from a plastic bottle over the cuts. The water ran pink, then bright red, then clear again. We drove in silence. I told a version of the truth later under fluorescent lights. I said I slipped in a tight spot. I said my leg hit rock. I said it was my fault. The nurse didn't look impressed. She cleaned the wounds, asked if my tetanus shot was up to date, and said, "You're lucky it wasn't worse," in the same tone you'd use for someone who burned their hand on a stove. They stitched what needed stitches, wrapped what needed wrapping, sent me home with instructions that had nothing to do with caves. I tried to be normal about it. I showered. I threw my clothes into the washer on hot. I scrubbed the mud out of my boots with an old toothbrush until the bristles bent. When I cleaned the tread, I found a thin strand of pale hair stuck in the grooves, almost clear, like fishing line until you held it to light. It wasn't mine. It wasn't my friend's. I flushed it because I didn't want it in my house. Last night I woke up at 2:13 a.m. because I heard something. Not footsteps, not a voice, not a movie sound through a wall. Breathing, slow and calm, through a nose coming from somewhere in the dark part of my home. I held my breath and listened, waiting for it to stop the way it did at the cave entrance. It didn't stop. It kept going, steady and quiet, like it was trying to match my rhythm. I tried to be rational. Houses make noise. Vents breathe. Pipes tick. Brains do weird things when they've been scared. Then I heard a small wet click. It could have been anything. The heater. A settling sound. My imagination snapping to a familiar pattern, but I didn't move for a long time. This morning, I found my boot by the door where I left it to dry. The toothbrush I'd used was sitting inside it. I do not remember putting it there. That's the only tangible thing I have other than stitches and scars, and it's almost nothing. It's not proof. It's just wrong. If you're the kind of person who thinks you can go underground and come back out unchanged, don't. Because I'm sitting here with my leg wrapped, trying to convince myself I'm safe, and I keep catching myself going quiet in my own home. Like silence is a trick that might keep me alive. And the worst part is, I'm not sure anymore if the cave followed us, or if it only learned us well enough to live in my head. The Ledger of Shadows. I'd always believed that isolation was a refuge, that the world could be escaped with enough distance and silence. But the mountain lodge I inherited, perched atop the cliffs where the wind tore relentlessly at the rocks, taught me that solitude has a voice, and it does not forgive. The mail had come for me unceremoniously. A single key, a folded note in a hand I did not recognize, and an address so remote that it seemed almost fictional. I arrived at dusk, the sun bleeding into the horizon like a wound, the sky smudged with violet and crimson, the mountains looming as if they were sentinels judging my presence. The lodge was ancient, more structure of shadow than wood. Windows gaped like vacant eyes. The door protested with a low groan when I pushed it open. Inside, dust hung thick in the air, a pungent perfume of neglect and decay. I moved through the foyer cautiously, my boots muted against the warped floorboards. Every sound seemed amplified, as if the house, or perhaps the air itself, was recording, measuring, marking my intrusion. It was there I found the ledger. I had not yet unpacked, yet on the main table lay a book, its binding cracked, its pages yellowed with age. The first lines I read were not words exactly. They were confessions, transcribed in tight, deliberate script. Names of people, dates, actions taken, lives ended. I recognized them, not personally, but through the creeping horror of indirect knowledge, the families I had ignored, the misdeeds I had excused, the innocents left to suffer because I had rationalized away responsibility. And as I read, the lodge seemed to inhale. The floor beneath me shivered subtly, as if acknowledging my guilt. The wind outside rose in shrill gusts, rattling the window panes. The air itself seemed to press against my lungs, urging me to continue. The ledger was patient, eternal, demanding. It did not care for my hesitation or my horror. I found a photograph tucked between the pages. My younger self, smiling in ignorance, framed by shadows of those I had wronged indirectly, nearly imperceptible, yet present. Eyes half hidden in corners, a hand resting faintly on a shoulder, a gaze that seemed to pierce decades. I recoiled, but the photograph remained insistent, patient. Night fell swiftly. The wind found the cracks in the lodge with intimate knowledge, and every creak of the floor, every groan of the timbers, was a language of accusation. I felt watched, not by the lodge, but by the ledger, by the ghosts of my own choices, by the weight of moral compromise given form and sentience. I tried to sleep, but my body would not obey. Shadows pulled in corners of the rooms, darker than darkness, shifting when my eyes strayed even briefly. I sensed movement in peripheral vision, figures that did not exist when I looked directly, always at the edges, always patient. By the second night, I had discovered a trapdoor beneath the rug in the sitting room. A stairwell descended into pitch, the air growing heavier, thicker, as though layered with a substance that resisted my breath. I carried a candle and a hammer, neither sufficient. Every step downward was a confession. Every moral lapse, every cruelty rationalized, every sin of omission pressing against my chest. The lower chamber was an archive of suffering. Objects lined the walls, toys, letters, photographs, trinkets, all associated with the people I had hurt or ignored. And in the center, a mirror. It did not reflect me. It reflected the lives I had touched indirectly, twisted by consequence, distorted yet alive. The figures stared back, some angry, some despairing, all aware of my gaze. I realized then that the lodge itself was a conscience made manifest. It did not forgive. It did not forget. It did not allow the comfort of rationalization. Every creak, every groan, every gust of wind was a syllable in a language I had spent a lifetime pretending not to understand. I began to speak to it. Whispered apologies that seemed to vanish instantly, absorbed into the walls, catalogued and judged. My voice echoed back distorted, mocking, never my own. The ledger seemed to pulse with my heartbeat, the pages turning of their own accord, rearranging themselves to ensure I would never forget. Days and nights lost meaning. The wind became a constant moan, a dirge underscoring my inability to escape. Sleep was no longer respite. Dreams were populated by the faces of those I had neglected, faces twisted into grotesque parodies of expectation and suffering. They demanded reckoning, not for punishment but for recognition. I ventured deeper into the lower chambers. The lodge expanded impossibly. Corridors twisted, doubling back, stairways descending into vast blackness that defied measurement. The air grew warmer, viscous, laden with whispers that I could feel more than hear. They were not audible, they were felt, impressions of accusation pressed directly into my nerves. In the heart of the lodge I found a chair. Not wooden, not stone, but woven from shadow and substance, alive and breathing faintly. It beckoned me to sit. As I obeyed, I felt my memories begin to separate, detached from identity. Every moment I had ignored, every plea I had overlooked, every act of silent complicity was extracted, distilled and projected before me in living tableau. I could not look away. The chair demanded attention, and the lodge had infinite patience. I understood then that the judgment was not temporal. It did not pass. It was eternal. Every moral lapse, every compromise, every choice to allow suffering was woven into the fabric of the building. My body was irrelevant. My soul, if it had ever existed untainted, was irrelevant. Only my acknowledgement, or lack thereof, mattered. Hours, days, or centuries passed. Time was meaningless. I had become both spectator and exhibit. Each confession I made was absorbed, twisted, reflected back to me in increasing complexity. The lodge's consciousness fed on recognition, not contrition. I realized with terror beyond articulation that I could never escape. And then the final revelation: the lodge was not confined to the mountain. The ledger, the air, the shadows, they were everywhere, waiting. Every choice I had made, every omission I had tolerated, had created threads that extended beyond these walls, beyond time, beyond space. The world itself had become complicit. I tried to flee. I ran through corridors that looped impossibly, each turn returning me to the same room, the same chair, the same ledger. My voice echoed endlessly, unheard. The lodge had no mercy. I understood at last the true horror. It was not punishment. It was awareness. And awareness is infinite. The final twist. I was not brought here by chance. I had always been here, from the first moral compromise I ever ignored. The lodge had waited patiently for me to recognize it, and in recognizing it, I became indistinguishable from it. My past, my present, and all possible futures were folded into a single, unending awareness. The wind outside shrieked, and I smiled, or thought I did, but the smile was not mine. The lodge watched, and now so did I, and still the ledger waits. Marrow Point. Marrow Point existed because it was convenient. A coastal town where the fog rolled in thick enough to erase the horizon, where the water was deep and the ground firm, and the people learned quickly not to ask why the sea never gave anything back. Ships passed offshore but rarely stopped. Those that did tended to leave lighter than they arrived, though no official records ever showed shortages. Marrow Point thrived quietly, efficiently, the way tumors do when no one is looking directly at them. Noah Varel returned after 12 years away, summoned by a letter that contained no apology and no explanation, only the announcement of his mother's death and the expectation, unspoken but absolute, that he would come. The road into town felt narrower than he remembered, the trees leaning inward as if curious, branches brushing the car with soft, deliberate taps. The radio cut out miles before the first house appeared, replaced by a low, steady hum that vibrated through the dashboard and into Noah's teeth. The townspeople greeted him with familiarity that bordered on relief. They touched his arm when they spoke, held eye contact too long, smiled with mouths that didn't quite remember how. Everyone mentioned his mother with the same phrase. She did her part. No one elaborated. When Noah asked what they meant, the answers slid away, evasive and gentle, like hands guiding him elsewhere. His childhood home smelled wrong. Not decay. Preserved things rarely do, but something processed, rendered down to usefulness. The floorboards creaked under his weight, each sound echoing a fraction too long, as if the house were repeating it internally. At night, he heard movement beneath the floors, a steady shifting like enormous lungs expanding and contracting beneath the foundation. Sleep came in fragments. When Noah dreamed, he stood in a vast dark space filled with whispering shapes, all of them facing inward, all of them listening. The whispers weren't words at first, just pressure, insistence, but over time they formed questions. What did you think would happen? Did you imagine you were exempt? The funeral was small and efficient. His mother's body was not displayed. She didn't want to be seen, the pastor said, smiling with professional warmth. The service focused not on who she had been, but on what she had given. When the coffin was lowered, Noah noticed the ground tremble faintly, as if swallowing. That night, the basement door opened on its own. The stairs descended farther than the house should allow, the walls shifting from concrete to something darker, smoother, faintly veined. The air grew warmer with each step, thick with moisture and a metallic tang that coated Noah's tongue. He realized, distantly, that the hum he'd heard since arriving was louder here, no longer ambient but directional, pulling him downward. The chamber beneath Marrow Point was not empty. It was inhabited. The walls were composed of layered human forms, bodies flattened, stretched, fused into architecture. Faces emerged and receded as if breathing. Eyes opened and closed in slow, asynchronous rhythms. The floor was resilient, springy with compressed flesh that shifted underfoot. They were alive, not individually, not anymore, but collectively, bound into a single immense organism that pulsed with purpose. Veins ran along the walls like illuminated maps. Bones reinforced load-bearing sections. Pain had been curated, preserved, repurposed into something functional. "Welcome home," the chamber conveyed, not with sound, but with sensation. Noah felt it directly in his nervous system, bypassing language. "We have been waiting for you." Images flooded him. His mother standing where he stood now, younger, terrified, understanding dawning too late. Her body opening not violently but precisely, every useful part catalogued. Her fear dissolving into comprehension as she felt herself become necessary. "You live because others stayed," the chamber pressed. "You ate because they fed us. You left because they did not." Noah tried to scream. The chamber absorbed the impulse, translating it into warmth. Hooks emerged from the walls, not crude, not threatening, but patient, arranged with anatomical intelligence. He understood their purpose instinctively. This place did not waste. "You may leave," the chamber offered. "You will carry us with you. We will grow elsewhere. Or you may remain and maintain equilibrium." Noah saw the truth then, not just of Marrow Point, but of systems everywhere. The quiet suffering, the unseen bodies propping up comfort, the way horror persists not because of monsters, but because of efficiency. "I won't," he said. "I won't be part of this." The chamber paused, considered, then responded with something like amusement. "There is no outside," it conveyed gently. Pain arrived not as punishment but as process. His body was opened with reverence, nerves preserved and amplified. Every sensation was catalogued, optimized. Fear sharpened into awareness. Awareness stretched into function. Noah felt himself being distributed, his strength reinforcing structure, his memories enriching pattern recognition, his guilt becoming adhesive. As he was integrated, Noah gained perspective. He felt the town above, the footsteps, the conversations, the daily transactions lubricated by unseen sacrifice. He felt ships passing offshore, people elsewhere benefiting unknowingly. He felt the organism dreaming, planning, extending itself through subtle channels of neglect and necessity. Time ceased to matter. He existed as sensation and knowledge, stretched thin across miles of living infrastructure. He understood now why no one ever destroyed Marrow Point. You cannot dismantle what is useful. Years later, another child would leave town. Another would return. The cycle would continue, not because anyone demanded it, but because everyone allowed it. The chamber did not hate them. It needed them. And need, Noah learned too late, was the most merciless thing of all.